A Ukrainian strike on a Russian airfield does heavy damage, while the front in the north of Kharkiv seems to be slowly stabilizing. At the same time, a big aid package for Ukraine is being announced. We'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the whole front line and what's going on behind the front lines in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Hello and welcome. Ukraine continues to strike Russian oil installations up to the Urals, and at the same time, Ukrainians struck electrical infrastructure mostly associated with the railroad infrastructure. Probably, if I understood it correctly, those were stations that move the rails to switch lanes, basically to change the direction. And as this is done by electronic means, striking the positions there will decrease the ability of the Russian logistics to keep functioning. Still, though, we have bad news for Ukraine in the air warfare. The Wall Street Journal has published an article according to which the Ukrainian interception rate fell from 73 to 46%. 30% was the interception rate last month. The Russians at the same time fired 45% additional rockets and missiles and drones against Ukraine in the last 6 months in comparison to the 6 months before, showing how they increased their production rate. Obviously, the most obvious reason for this is a lack of air defense ammunition, but improved Russian tactics are also relevant in this regard. And we have the New York Times reporting the same and providing us with telling graphics that you can see here. Red are the missiles and drones that were not intercepted. This is April 23 and this is April 24. You see that over half of them have no longer been intercepted in the last few months, more or less. Then we'll switch to the front line north of Kharkiv. Here, the Russians now have the town of Lukyantsy in their hands. It now fell fully into Russian hands, and east of it we have a Russian presence, at the very least in the half of Burovatka. At the same time, fighting for Vovchansk is also continuing and intensifying, and we have geolocalizations here to the west of the town. You see here the road, and to the east, and especially the east is telling as they basically bypass and start to encircle Vovchansk. The first one was roughly here, and the second one was already here. So you see this area, which is still being shown as fully under Ukrainian control on this map, is no longer under Ukrainian control. The Russians are at the very least here. They also entered the town. Fighting is continuing in the town and the Russians have advanced in there, but the exact situation is not completely clear. The Ukrainians claimed that counterattacks have been successful to a certain degree, while at the same time the situation is there are signs of the Russians advancing further into town. So as of now, I cannot fully say who controls how much. We just know that the Russians advanced further into Vovchansk. To do a comparison, we take the map of the pro-Ukrainian mill blogger Petrenko here, and we see him giving full Russian control in the northern part of Vovchansk, and also showing that the contested area has reached this here. So an overview of his map is this, and in the past he's proven to be fairly accurate, so a fairly reliable source about differences along the front line. Let's switch to the eastern front. Here the fighting is obviously also continuing, and the Russians gained some territory between Ivanivka and Yahidne. Here it's not that much, like 200 to 300 meters in depth, but the overall situation has not changed in this area here. Then we switch to the south of the Siversky Donetsk. Now Siversk is still being pushed at by the Russians, but still no changes in territory, but it's somewhat different. At Chasiv Yar, here the Russians managed to have additional success close to Chasiv Yar. We have a geolocalization here again, with the Russians now being here, and on the map here it is already displayed that it's up here. So the Russians roughly gained this area here as confirmed position, as confirmed gains over the last few days. Further south, we do not have any change. There are some claims about Klishivka, but no proof of it, and Russian mill bloggers are contradicting each other, so we are not able to prove any change in territory there as of now. At Avdiivka, we have the Russians advancing in the south at Umanske. Here, the advance has been somewhat significant. They have reached the southern, almost the end of the southern part of Umanske, as you can see here, and they have been here on the map. This is here and down here. I'm not completely sure whether that can actually be a proof of this southern part to be occupied. We've had the Russians up here already, but it seems likely that at the very least 2/3 of Umanske is now in Russian hands. As said, pictures like this don't fully prove that the Russians are still there. It basically just proves that the Russians have been there, but it's the best we can do at this very moment. Then we can move further south here, and here at Pervomaiske, the expected has happened. This area was still being considered contested over the last few days. The Russians have now occupied it. The obvious result there was a Ukrainian withdrawal, as they had a hard time supplying these positions with the river in the south, and the Ukrainians having lost the positions to the west and to the east and to the north. So the withdrawal from that area was to be expected. I said as much roughly a week and a half ago, and we now see the result here that the Russians have occupied this territory. Further south at Krasnohorivka, I have no real massive change. So the Russians are now being shown to be inside of these buildings. They are south of this area here now being proven. The situation north of the brick factory isn't completely clear, but they seem to have advanced over the last few days. But overall, not a big change compared to the past changes, even though the initiative and the gains are clearly within the Russian side over the last few days. Over here in the south, no change that can be reported. And to the west, south of Velika Novosilka, we do have some changes. Now, there is a fresh geolocalization of Russian troops in Uroshaine. They are up here now. This should be, let me see it again. We have the buildings here, the line of buildings. So the Russians now have a position up here. So probably this area is now in Russian hands, at least if we want to believe the geolocalizations. And the Russians have gained additional ground in Staromayorsk as well on the other side of the river. Here they gained additional positions in the tree lines here on the high ground, and they have advanced somewhat in the ruins of the town in the south. So there again, they are also working on rolling back Ukraine's gains from their counteroffensive. Further west at Orikhiv, we have no change, not much change that we can prove. So the Russians probably gained one tree line here, northwest of Verbove. Robotine is the big question. The Russians claimed that they have fully captured it. This is not confirmed yet, and we have Ukrainians claiming this is not the truth. There is no visual evidence of either Ukrainian positions still in the town, nor do we have visual proof of the Russians controlling the whole town. So something might have changed there, but I'm not able to fully supply you with the difference in control. We can quickly look at Petrenko, and as you can see, Petrenko also does not change the overall situation here either. Let's go back to the front line here. Let's switch further to the west to the bridgehead on the Dnipro in Krinky, and here the weird geolocalizations continue. Now we have the Russians here and even directly at the Konka. This is this wooden piece that we can take to orient ourselves. So we have this here, and the Russians are roughly here and here. This would again indicate that they advance inside of town, that they gained additional position. This is possible, but at the same time, the front line seems to be fluid. I'm not going to repeat myself again and again. Basically, I'm not completely sure where the front line is, how much of these are patrols that are being spotted and then being fought, or how much of these are permanent installations. Both is possible. As of now, we just have geolocalizations deeper into the supposed Ukrainian positions than we had over the last few weeks. So it might be that the Russians are slowly advancing and pushing the Ukrainians out, but that's not conclusive proof yet. On the Crimean Peninsula, Ukraine has struck an army base, or better, an Air Force base, but where a radio unit was situated. It was struck with several storm shadows, and the exact damage is not sure. I have no proof of what happened. The Ukrainians claimed they killed the commander of the unit and caused significant damage, but I do not have visual proof, and I have not seen a Russian mail blogger confirming the damage. Where we do have some information, though, is Belbek. The airfield in Belbek has been once again attacked by the Ukrainians, this time with ATACMS, showing that they have longer range ATACMS there in usage as well. We know that it was hit. It's unclear to which extent, but there's a pro-Russian Telegram channel that is saying that one MiG-31 was destroyed, 3 Sukhoi 27 were damaged with cluster munitions, and there is an image being spread around, or images, that show a radar system being destroyed, a modern radar system for the S-400. It was claimed to be destroyed, as well as one TEL, one transporter erector launcher for both the S-300 as well as the S-400. So this seems to be a new picture of one of Russia's modern air defense radar systems. We also have fighter bomber, for instance, confirming that it was hit. He's mourning the Russian losses, but does not give additional information, except claiming that both sides are lying as usual. So we know that Belbek was hit. We know that there was damage done. We know that the damage wasn't insignificant. If we believe the other Russian mill blogger, then 4 planes are taken out. Obviously, damaged with cluster munition is unclear. Now, if it's somewhat close, then the planes might look like Swiss cheese and are scrap. If it was at a longer distance, a few shrapnel might be patched up. This is impossible to say right now how damaged those 3 Sukhoi 27 might be, but important is that the Sukhoi 27 there is being used by the Navy, which, as far as I know, does not fly a lot of sorties against the Ukrainians, especially in regards to ground attack. They are mostly operating over the Black Sea, so the effect of these attacks might be less than it would have been if Sukhoi 30 or Sukhoi 35 would have been damaged. They are used by the Air Force against Ukrainian ground forces to drop glide bombs, to hunt down Ukrainian planes, etc. Still, though, a big success, especially the radar system and additional air defense being taken out, which will make follow-up strikes, let's just use that word until I remember the other one, that will make follow-up strikes much easier. And generally, for the overall situation, we have Budanov, the head of the GUR, of the Ukrainian military intelligence. He's saying that he expects a stabilization of the front in Kharkiv in the coming days, and the advance has clearly slowed down. So this is a sign of it slowing down right now, but he says he's also expecting an additional invasion into Sumy over the next few days. So according to him, we should expect the Russians crossing the border here fairly soon. The Ukrainians supposedly have also struck a train, actually, with a drone. It derailed and damage was done, and the interesting part, it was done in Volgograd. Now, I have no indication whether that was a drone flying from Ukraine to Volgograd or whether that was saboteurs or special forces close by, but the train supposedly carried fuel, as we can see here in some of the shots, that there were tanker wagons here. So the supposedly damaging Russia's logistics. And then we have news about force generation. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty reports here that in Russia, government companies are hiring people with high wages, but they don't even use them in the company. They just send them to the military, and they are used at the front line. And that this is done by government-owned companies, but also with private ones. The private ones are participating in this to protect their own personnel and to prove to the government how loyal they are. At least those are the claims. So basically that people are being tricked into being hired for regular work while they are actually being sent to the front line. In the political sphere, we have Lieutenant General Yuri Kuznetsov, who was the deputy defense minister who was arrested for corruption. The Russians said that they found 100 million ruble in cash, as well as foreign currency, luxury objects in his house. Now, from what I read, that is what is expected with a planned arrest for corruption, that they want to be able to show to the public what was caught. The interesting part is, while this is the normal way, his colleague Timur Ivanov, who was also arrested for corruption, there the Russians were not able to show something like this, which led to the conclusion that Timur Ivanov's arrest was a hasty decision, whereas this would now show more planning in this regard. But we see a cleanup in the Russian Defense Ministry after the removal of the Defense Minister Shoigu, who was promoted to the head of the Security Council, which in fact is more a demotion at the same time, though. Then we have Dmitry Peskov, who was now was given the job as assistant to the president. He was running the Security Council before and was considered to be the most powerful man in Russia after Putin. He was now going to be responsible for strategic development of the naval building industry. That's kind of different than being supposedly the second most powerful person inside of Russia, now suddenly being responsible for the naval industry, but we'll have to see what that will mean. From the occupied Ukraine, we further have information that the Russians are using children, or are sending children into camps to re-educate them. They supposedly, according to the Ukrainians in those camps, they're being told that Ukraine doesn't exist, but is a part of Russia, to basically brainwash them and turn them into loyal Russians to be able to use them in the future. At least that's what the Ukrainians accuse the Russians of doing. And I have a picture here of Shoigu now in the first meeting of the Security Council, where he is now a part of. We see him down here, and we see him no longer in uniform, but in suit and tie. Sad for Shoigu, he can no longer LARP as being a general, because as the usual picture you know from Shoigu is him wearing uniform with the general stars on his shoulders. The fact is, he is not a soldier. He was a minister, a civilian being put into that job, and then just giving the title of general. He was basically playing the general where he never was, walking around in uniform, and now he has to wear civilian clothing again. In a German article, in a German journal, there's the interesting article according to which the Russian new defense minister has the plan to reduce the casualties. That he publicly said that he wants to win with the least amount of casualties. The article says it's weird and unexpected and so on, but in my point of view, that makes perfect sense. Now, we need to understand that Belousov is an economist. An economist knows that even soldiers are a resource that cannot easily be replaced, that soldiers are competing with the economy, with the market, and that in a long war, apart from will, it's the economy that decides who wins. So what we see here is him publicly saying, we are working to have low human losses. This will help the Russians recruit volunteers. Obviously, it's much easier to sign up when you expect to have a higher chance of survival than if you're being thrown in the meat grinder. At the same time, it makes it he also said that they are not going to do another mobilization. This gives companies some measure of planning ability. This will also mean, if people believe him, that fewer will leave the country, try to avoid military service. All of this are signs where he basically gives trust to the Russian public, and at the same time he's expected to be given this job, that he received the job because he's not corrupt and be competent. And if you have somebody who is not corrupt, supposedly at least, and will fight corruption, who is competent and has a long-term plan, and as an economist he understands the workings of the economy, then it's obviously not news that I would consider great news for Ukraine, as this man, from every serious account that I see, is being considered to be highly competent and will likely do his best to increase Russia's war production, while at the same time planning for a long war. And then obviously in a long war, losses will make a big difference. And in a long war with increased production, this will actually allow the Russians to have smaller losses, as he if he manages to increase the production, they will be better equipped and thus no longer forced to use infantry-focused attacks in the future. We'll have to see though, but as said, so far I don't see much that would be a positive news for Ukraine. I know there were some comments that Shoigu being removed is something good. So far I do not see any positive of Shoigu being removed. I think from what I see and from what I read, Belousov will be a bigger problem for Ukraine than Shoigu was. But we have international support, and there Estonia is discussing sending troops to Ukraine to help them in the rear areas, so no frontal fighting. But the government says it will coordinate with other nations, so it's not that Estonian soldiers are about to be sent. They just said that if it comes to that, they are willing to with others in a rear area. This might be in air defense, this might be in demining, this might be jobs where Ukrainian soldiers have to be there right now for various tasks, but can't. Those soldiers are fixed in place by this and obviously can't help along the front lines. Then we have the US announcing another new aid package, size of 2 billion, so a significant aid is going to come to Ukraine again. And Lithuania said that they managed to set aside 10 million euros for ammunition for Ukraine. That might not be much, but then again, Lithuania is a small country. And finally, we have something from Romania. Now, Romania considers helping Ukraine with a Patriot battery. And the Russians weren't happy about it and were sending mean messages. And the Romanian Prime Minister says, great, I'm happy with Moscow's reaction. It means that we count in mobilizing against the dictator Putin. Now, this is, as you would say in internet terms, this is probably a Chad response. Or if you want to have the more classical response, I was reminded of Lucius Accius, who said, Ude Rind, dum metuant. Basically, they may hate us as long as they fear us. So a self-confident response from Romania in this regard. That was it from me for now. If you enjoyed this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments along the front line, especially in the north? And where do you think the Ukrainians will be able to stop the Russians? If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching and I'll be back.